Welcome to today's webinar on vendor risk management presented by Iceberg Networks. My name is Glenn Gower, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Iceberg, and I'll be your moderator today. Vendor risk management is the #1 governance, risk, and compliance use case that we hear about from our customers across North America. Every organization is under pressure to build revenue, reduce costs, find efficiencies, and vendors and third parties are crucial to those goals. Coming up, you'll see how organizations are using ServiceNow to gain visibility into their vendors, prioritize risk management activities on the most critical vendors and risks, and most importantly, gain the confidence that vendor and third-party relationships are safe. Now, today I'm joined by two of my colleagues. Kirk Hogan is Iceberg's Senior VP of GRC Services and our Chief Operating Officer. Welcome, Kirk.
Thanks, Glenn.
And Travis Giff is a Senior GRC Architect and Developer and part of our ServiceNow team here at Iceberg. Welcome, Travis.
Thank you, Glenn.
Now, before I pass things over to the two of you, I do want to remind our audience that if you have any questions, you can send them to us via the chat panel on your screen, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can during today's presentation. And because everybody always asks when we do a webinar, yes, we will be sharing today's deck and a video archive of the presentation. So we'll email that out after we're done this afternoon. And with that, Kirk, I'll hand things over to you.
Thanks, Glenn. So just quickly about Iceberg. So Iceberg is 100% focused on governance, risk, and compliance, or GRC. That's all we do. We operate across both Canada, the United States, and we do have a few global clients. But we do have a very large bench of fully certified individuals. We also implement and sell these solutions. But I want to talk about outcomes. In our experience, the key thing we do differently is focus on outcomes. And to explain this, I want to introduce an analogy. An analogy would be a cake. A cake is the outcome. I'm not a baker. Don't know what goes into a cake. All I know is I want a cake. So I think it's really important that we focus on what those things are. I'm going to talk more about what maybe the outcome is for a vendor risk solution. But here's what we focus on usually. We focus on what goes into the cake. I'll call them features. I'll also refer to them as squirrels because they focus our attention on some of the wrong things when we lose focus on what we're really trying to achieve, and those are the outcomes. How many of you may have found yourself maybe accepting new vendor relationships without an assessment, maybe because it takes too long? Has anyone ever had to go somewhere and ask a friend for a ride? And the time comes and your friend doesn't show up? And the appointment you had was an interview, or maybe it was a medical checkup. You not only felt disappointment, but you may have lost out on a job or incurred a penalty because you missed that appointment. Some sort of consequence. I liken this scenario to vendor risk management. The appointment is your business, your friend is your vendor, and the disappointment or penalty is the risk. So VRM, vendor risk management, is the business version of this scenario. My name's Kirk Hogan. My hair is chrome, and I've earned it through living risk management for many years now. But I'm still young enough to have the passion to share the things that work in the real world, and it starts with outcomes. I just want to maybe discuss what is an outcome then maybe for a VRM in that context. Well, to give you some context, in 2017, the OCC published a guideline around the risk management third-party relationships. In it, it states 6 items that the board minutes indicate that the board reviews and approves. And I'm going to summarize the methodology for determining critical activities, management plans for using those third parties involved in critical activities, summary due diligence, contracts with third parties around critical activities. You're starting to get the gist of it. They're really focused on what is around the critical activities. The OSFI body in Canada does almost the exact same thing, so I won't repeat those, but what they're really trying to do is they're trying to sort of get their hands around what I would categorize as 4 categories of vendor relationships. Those that are urgent, those are things maybe you have to do right away, like maybe it's immediate up to maybe 2 weeks. And then the next three are what I call short cycle, medium cycle, or long cycle. And you can talk about 2 weeks to 2 months, 2 months to 6 months, greater than 6 months. But it really translates into two very simple statements. For the urgent and immediate ones, it's sort of like, what did we just do? What risks did we just accept? Do we even know? So, and then for the longer term relationships, maybe we're asking things like, what risks are we considering? What will we take on, and what needs to be mitigated? So in the spirit of outcomes, I want to talk about the outcomes for this webinar. I want to talk about success criteria, defining better ones. And I define a success criteria as a way to measure progress towards your outcome. So anything can be measured, as Douglas Hubbard will teach us, and all that changes is the confidence in our answer. Also, the outcome is what's at stake: your business, your reputation, your clients' information, jobs, and the list goes on. The stakes are high. We'll discuss 3 different personas about who will benefit during the demo, but remember that the business and the board will benefit the most. And the other one is where to start. It can be a daunting exercise to spin up a VRM program. Here's just a reflection on maybe some of the common vendor risk challenges we see today. So a lot of manual and time-consuming processes. I won't pick on Excel, let's just call them spreadsheets, because we all run our businesses on spreadsheets in the early days because it's easy, but they're disconnected. They start off with tens, then there's dozens, then there's hundreds. I have worked with large organizations that have thousands of spreadsheets. Then you add in the emails, and you add in the meetings and the phone calls, and all these are disconnected. So the challenge then for these teams is, how do you encapsulate all of that to get a really holistic view about what risks you're taking on with those third-party relationships? And by the way, Linda Tuck-Chapman does a great job of explaining that a vendor relationship is vendors and non-vendors. So those are the external people and also maybe internal groups that you're doing business with. And every one of them should be managed as a vendor. Siloed processes, so this is the truth of it, is you may not discuss with an organization, maybe it's a personality, maybe it's something else that stops you, maybe you don't even know you're supposed to communicate with those challenges or those organizations. The other thing is trying to find the right times for things to happen, make sure that people doing things and they manage their own time appropriately. But in the end, you don't have the visibility you need into the overall program. And the vendor risk posture is a big question mark. You think you know what it is, but you can't point at anything and prove to anybody what that is. So here's what we want to talk about today. So I'm going to set Travis up for his walkthrough of the solution on ServiceNow. The challenges, so lack of visibility, we talked about that, is if we can't see it, how do we know? Regulatory burden, the fact is you're probably working in a regulated environment, whether it's one or many regulations. But every one of those puts a burden on you. And unless you have an efficient way to manage all of those controls and the state of those controls, it becomes really hard to manage. And then, of course, you're doing that with limited resources. This is a common theme we see across all organizations, not just small. Large organizations have those pressures as well. So the solution, so to gain visibility, we need to monitor. We need to monitor all these activities, and we need to monitor it before the regulators get involved, because we owe ourselves the answer before we owe it to the examiners. We need to automate to get some speed, but not everything should be sped up. If it doesn't work now, don't make it faster. Peter Drucker, a great management consultant, says, there's nothing so useless as doing that which should not have been done at all. So really, it's a great phrase to remind us, find the things that really make sense and make them faster if at all possible. Now, here's the real trick, is to prioritize, and that gives you the agility, and not you as the VRM team, it gives the business the agility to compete in the market. So if you can prioritize, and the regulators and your board are probably talking about tier 1 material vendors, people who are critical to or key processes. And that matters, because if you have 100 vendors, or if you've got 1,000 or tens of thousands of vendors, you need to do some sort of prioritization, because you can't handle all at once. The other one is, if they're not involved in a strategic or critical process, why would they float to the top? So this solution needs to be able to help float those things to the top. So now we want to create impact. So those outcomes, the ultimate goal of an outcome is to create that impact. Building trust and maintaining trust is the holy grail. It really is, because the customers want their information protected, and you need to gain their trust that you will, and you need to maintain their trust. Partners, and when I mean partners, I'm talking about internal partners, I'm talking about vendor partners, but I'm also talking about regulators. They can be your partners. They don't want to catch you off. They don't want you to go out of business. They want you to thrive, because when you thrive, the economy thrives. They are vested in your success. So trust, and if you treat them like partners, this kind of a solution will allow you to do that, and we're going to show you how to do that. And the executives and board, so they're ultimately responsible to the regulators, they're responsible to shareholders, and responsible to you, because they protect the job and the health of that organization. That's why trust is so, so important. Reducing time and cost, we talked about efficiency. So if we can find the right, as I like to call them, candidates for automation. If something happens once a year, not a great candidate. If it happens frequently, and I can show a decrease by measuring a baseline, remember, I can measure everything. It's just my confidence that changes. I can drive down my cost. And then the impact that we're all after is providing value. So I want to talk about what providing value really means. We can declare success towards our outcomes if we can deliver a validated inventory of at least your material vendors, a methodology-based assessment that regulators and the board believe demonstrate due diligence. And if we can identify overlap of alternative suppliers, so I'm focusing at reduced supplier costs. I know that ServiceNow just announced that they had solidified a partnership with VendorHawk. VendorHawk looks across the SaaS software sprawl across your organization and tries to find the overlaps and tries to drive in the efficiencies. Taking this kind of enhanced perspective of all the different perspectives on the vendor relationship will start to drive in those reductions in costs. Moving faster with the agility, it really is about maybe reassigning some of those efficiency you gain to go after the fourth one, that is drive new revenue streams. Can you imagine reclaiming all that effort associated with those 4 categories of engagements? And if everybody went through that way and they trusted that your program works, they're going to bring new vendor relationships to you because they trust the program works. They trust it's expeditious, it works quickly, and it's not a hurdle to doing business. That would be value for a VRM program. So it really is about delivering risk intelligence. And we'd like to say it's about trusted, aggregated, and transparent risk data that enables the organization to make informed, confident, and effective business decisions. So we move from this disconnected information. We apply business context to it. We aggregate it with that context. We report it. And report it, I like to say visualize it, because you've heard the phrase, I can't see what you mean, or I don't understand. Well, a lot of the times a picture speaks 1,000 words. We've heard that before, but allows those people who need to make decisions making better business decisions. And they can trace that right down. So really that is what governance, risk, and compliance is doing, it, and which vendor risk management is a huge portion of that. So 5 key capabilities of the ServiceNow vendor risk management solution. Vendor portfolio. I talked about having an inventory of those material vendors, but all vendors and non-vendors. So if you're able to have an area within the solution that has those, and that's sort of the hub from which you do all of your assessments, now you can look to the right on the top line for assessment management. This is really about asking a structured methodology, systematic-based way of maybe using a SIG, standard information gathering template. Maybe it's your own corporate type of questions, but if you can do it in a systematic way, I guarantee you the regulators will start to look at you and perhaps even reduce the sampling expectation on your organization. So strong assessment management. Now, vendor portal, this is probably the biggest win of the entire solution. So imagine being able to enlist your entire vendor network to help you do the assessment. You send out assessments as it is today, but they're probably sent out in Excel. You may have trouble getting them into your solution if you have one, but if they had their own vendor portal to go to, and they were able to interact in a way that we interact on the web today, in a very consumerized way, so blogging, communication, back and forth, and it really does drive out the majority of your time. So this is where you start to get solutions like vendor risk management that drive processes from months down to weeks or hours, and it really can be had. Issues and the remediation of the issues. So it's great that the assessment is done by the vendor, but a lot of the times there are gaps that are found. So this solution will identify ways to bring up those issues, get them to the vendor, have them go back and forth with you until you're satisfied that they have brought it into the residual risk area where you need to from an organization. And the last part I want to talk about is GRC integration. So we're going to talk about vendor risk today, but vendor risk is typically part of an operational risk program, an enterprise risk program, but it ties into your entire organization because typically all of those vendor relationships are spun up from within the business and they own 100% of the risk, and yet they throw it back to a corporate function of vendor risk management. So by having an integration to GRC, the organization starts to get this very complete and trusted and confident view about the risk in the organization. So I want to reflect on what we're going to show you now. Is we're going to show you a company that's going to go through this journey, and they're going to do it with a combination of the back office user experience and the vendor portal user experience. It's going to be something that is assessment based, and it's going to tie in all the different areas of the organization. It's going to work with your vendor catalog, and it's going to provide this encapsulated point of view. I just want to reflect quickly on a conversation I had with a bank a couple of weeks ago. Their biggest problem they were trying to solve was actually being able to track all of their disparate communications and provide that record of decision pointing at any one of those communications so that when the board looked at them, they could demonstrate why they were confident in this risk score applied to this vendor. So they were starting to see the light as we talked about the solution. So they're about to embark on this journey. So I'm going to hand off to my colleague, Travis, who's going to take us on a journey of XYZ company.
Thank you, Kirk.
Actually, before I do that, I'm going to take, if you could pass back to me. I'm going to set you up here on how things are going.
Thanks, Kirk. So what I want to do is set the stage for my demo here and just go over some of the personas that I'm going to be playing throughout the demo. So the first one is, as a vendor manager of XYZ company, I need to assess the risk associated with a new professional services vendor that's going to assist with implementing my organization's vendor risk program. Some of the key activities I'll be performing are setting up the vendor portfolio, defining the vendor contacts, and creating an assessment template. The next persona I'll be playing is the vendor risk assessor. Now, as the vendor risk assessor, I need to send out an assessment and follow up with the professional services vendor. So some of the key activities I'll perform are distributing the assessment to the vendor, reviewing the responses of the assessment, and following up with any issues. And last but not least, the vendor. So as the vendor, I need to complete the assessment and respond to follow up to any issues as per the request of XYZ company. Some of the key activities I'll be performing are responding and submitting the assessment, managing my team, and following up with any issues. So right now I'm currently logged in as a vendor manager. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and set up a record for our vendor, which is Iceberg Networks Corporation. Here we can capture the name of the vendor, the website, the industry. So they're a consulting services company that is a strategic partner of ours, and they have a current risk rating of low, and they belong to our low risk tier. Now, Iceberg, they help organizations plan, deploy, and support successful implementations of governance, risk management, and compliance solutions that drive more informed business decisions. Here we can see the contact data about Iceberg Networks and any vendor contacts. So this would be an activity performed by the vendor manager. They would come in, add any new key contacts to contact with the vendor, or this could be done through integration or importing. So there's many ways to get this data into ServiceNow. Right now we just kind of entered it manually at this use case. So down here we can tie the vendor back to any of our business services. We can see any repeating assessments that may be sent out over time. Here we can see any active assessments or completed assessments, any issues with the vendor, any tasks they might be performing today, as well as we can tie this into some of the GRC modules within ServiceNow today. So we can determine if the controls are effective with this vendor, or the risks have been properly mitigated or accepted with the vendor. So what I'm going to do now is go to my vendor risk assessor. And the vendor risk assessor is going to go and send out an assessment to Iceberg Networks. So I'll come down here in my vendor record, go to the assessments, and add a new assessment record. So here, I'm going to select a template. Now, a template is a reusable item that allows me to send out certain requests. So maybe I want to send out a certain questionnaire for them to complete, or a certain document request as a non-disclosure agreement for them to sign and submit. So I'll just select the assessment template, assign it to someone who needs to follow up with it on my side. So this is the vendor risk assessor. And what I'm going to do here is save this record. And maybe what I want to do is determine what is the initial risk rating of this. We'll just say low for now because we're not sure what we're actually going to get. So we'll allow the responses of the questionnaire to determine what the risk rating is of this vendor. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to submit this assessment to the vendor. So a few things are going to happen here is the vendor is going to get a notification that assessment has been created, and in that notification they'll have a link to click on which will take them into the vendor portal. So let's take a look at what that experience would be like for the vendor. So the vendor would navigate into the portal and they would see that there's a new vendor assessment for them to action. They would click on the assessment and they would see what the assessment actually contains. So in this example, we have a SIG Lite questionnaire and a document request for a non-disclosure agreement. Now the vendor themselves can go through these tasks and determine maybe this is something I want to assign to a different individual. So they could simply come in here and assign it to another person and remove themselves, or maybe both of them are going to work on it together. So actually assigning these activities are fairly painless in ServiceNow. As well as typically when you need a new individual on your organization added, you got to contact the customer's IT department, get them to create a user account, and there's a lot of back and forth with that in order to get that member of your team added. So with the ServiceNow vendor portal, you can actually manage your own team on the vendor side. So they simply just come up here, select Manage Team, and we can invite a new person from the vendor side to come in and complete some tasks. So maybe we're just going to invite John Doe from our legal department to help out with filing the non-disclosure agreement. Let's put in an email address here. And once we're done this, we just simply come down and save the record. Now what's going to happen is an account's going to be created, registration email sent, and a new vendor contact record is actually associated with that vendor portfolio we've seen previously. So now if I go back home, go to my assessment, and grab down from the assign to of any task, I can see that John Doe is now an individual that I can assign work to. So it was a simple, painless process in order to add a new individual of my vendor group. So let's take a look at the SIG Lite assessment. So here we have the ability to answer the SIG Lite in the web interface by simply selecting a response to any of these questions, providing any additional comments. And what we'll see here is we have quick navigation. So there's many sections in this SIG Lite. I'm not going to state the amount of questions, but we're just going to go through and click the different sections, and you'll see how we can easily navigate through the different sections. Another great thing about this is we can simply track the progress of each one of these sections by, once we click the response to a question, we'll see a little indicator come up here. And if we complete a section, we'll get a green checkbox, and if we haven't touched it at all, it's just simply blank. But not only that, where the magic really happens is we have the capability to download the SIG template, fill it in offline, to have an an audit item and import that item so we don't have to go through the whole web interface. So let me show you that. So what I have here is I've already downloaded the SIG template. Now this could have been achieved just by simply clicking the download button, and I've filled out some responses here to the SIG Lite. I've saved it, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to import this. Now, this will take a few minutes to go through and import this, but what's going to happen is anything I've responded to in the template will be populated in the interface, and a dialog will pop up to tell me that it's been successfully imported. So it should take a few seconds to refresh this, and I can go through and I can see the sections that I have completed, the responses associated with them, and exit this when I'm completed. Now, once I've completed this, there's another item here, the non-disclosure agreement document request. Let's take a quick look in there to see what a document request looks like. So here we're simply just asking for a signed copy of the non-disclosure agreement. Do we have one? Yes or no? We have one. Let's attach that non-disclosure agreement and put any additional information in here. Please find attached. Once I'm done, I'll save this and I'll exit. I'll discard any changes that I might have made after the save. And now I want to submit this assessment. Well, I've only answered 28 of 172 questions. Don't have time to do all these 172 questions in this demo, so let's just simply submit this assessment. I'm going to submit it, and it's going to give me a warning that some of the requests are incomplete. Are you sure you want to submit the assessment? I sure am, so let's click OK. And now what I'm going to do is go back into the main interface as the vendor risk assessor and review the responses of the assessment. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So let's refresh our form here. And now I'm going to go to a previously created template just to show you that I've received the responses and we can review the content of those responses. So let's navigate down to the questionnaire. Click this little link that says View Responses. And we'll get the same look and feel as the vendor got. So we can navigate quickly through the sections by clicking on it, see quickly what they have completed or not completed, see responses to the questions in real time, as well as we can flag any of these items for additional follow-up and comment. So let's just flag this one. This one's saying that they don't have a risk assessment program that's been approved by management. Please explain why. And once we put some comments in here, we can save this, which will save any of our responses. We can show follow-up responses only by a couple quick filters up here, so it filters out anything else. And we can also filter by incorrect and unscored responses. So in this case, we're going to get a lot that's returned, but we can simply click it and we can see which ones were not answered or which ones scored inaccurately. So let's save this and we'll navigate out of this one. And now let's create some issues to gather more information from the vendor. So we'll put this in a generating observations phase. And let's save this record. And then down here, let's create a new issue. So we knew that there was no risk assessment program in place that's been approved. So when is the risk assessment program going to be approved? That's our short description. Let's copy this and just put it in our description. Let's assign this item to a vendor contact. In this case, we'll pick Kirk Hogan. We'll make this item visible in the vendor portal and provide any recommendations. So the recommendation is we need additional information. And this is the information that we need. So let's put that in the explanation. We'll save this record, and once we're satisfied with all the preliminary foundation of the issue, let's submit this to the vendor. So I've submitted this to the vendor, so what's going to happen is they're going to get a notification that there's some issues ready for their attention, and the vendor is going to come into the portal. So let's take a look at that. So let's just navigate back to our assessments, click on the assessment in question, and the issue. So we can see the issue right in the portal itself. So Kirk would come in, click on the number of the issue, see the priority of it, when it was created, the status, when it's expected to be submitted by. He can assign it to someone else if he wants to, write it within this view, attach the documents if he has any, or he can actually comment and talk back and forth with the vendor here. So maybe he just simply made a mistake and he selected the wrong response, so he could just put that in his comments. I selected the wrong response. And you can post that, and what's going to happen is on the vendor side, we refresh this record. We can see any of the notes and comments that Kirk has provided. So he selected the wrong response. So now the vendor can come back in here and say that the issue's been resolved and we're all good to go. So what we're going to do now is navigate back in as the vendor risk assessor, and we've got all our contents. So let's refresh this. And we're in the review phase. So we've sent out our assessment, we've got a questionnaire completed, we've got a document request completed, we've created some issues and followed up with the vendor, and now we're in the review phase. Once everything has been completed and we're satisfied, we can simply close this complete, incomplete, or cancel if we choose to cancel this assessment. So we're good with the issue. Now, let's take a quick look at some of the reports that exist out of the box right now for the vendor risk module. There's a lot of reporting capabilities. So right now, here's just a simple vendor risk overview. We can see the vendors by risk rating, whether they're low, medium, minor, high, critical, any upcoming vendor risk assessments, any open issues by priority. We can also see any assessments that are due this week, any vendor responses due this week, or just simply all open assessments. Now, right now, we don't see a lot of reports on here, which is not a big deal because the ServiceNow platform is actually really capable of performing any report generation at the click of a mouse. So let's just click into this low risk rating vendors here to get a bit more data. So for example, maybe I wanted to create a report that is low risk vendors by country. I can simply just click the header of this and I can go bar chart or pie chart. And by this, within a few seconds, it's going to gather all that data and make me a preliminary report. And I can see down here that I have 3 in USA that are low risk, 1 in Canada, 1 in Germany. So creating reports in ServiceNow is easy as a click of a button.
Travis, that's a great overview. Thank you. We do have a few questions coming in from the audience. One of them is, you showed some of the questionnaires. How difficult or how easy is it to create templates or edit those questionnaires and assessments?
Question. So what we can do is let's just go in as the vendor manager here, and I'll show you how easy it is. So what we can do here is go to the assessment template here, or the questionnaire designer, and we can set up a new questionnaire, or we can modify an existing one if we want to, but what we can do is just hit this button, and we can open a questionnaire. So let's just open the sample questionnaire that exists out of the box, because this will show you a lot of the different kinds of control types you can have, as in attachments or multiple choice or date fields. If we wanted to add a new field to this questionnaire, we simply just take it, drag it, drop it to anywhere within the questionnaire we desire, whether it be a new text field, whether it be a multiple choice field, and then once we're done, we can actually preview the questionnaire. So let's just take a quick look at what the questionnaire would look like in all the different control types. So we can see yes, no, We have a selection box, an attachment, there's a date field, number, percentage. There's lots of different control options we have available within the questionnaire designer template, and that's the same for the document request template as well.
What about, I saw the SIG Lite and the SIG Full listed there. Are those out of the box, or are those things that you've created or inputted on your own?
Yes, those are out of the box. There's been really no customizations for this demo. I've just shown you the 5 key components of the vendor risk module out of the box.
Okay, another question is about, you mentioned integration with policy and controls. Looking to get a little bit more info about what that looks like.
Okay, let's see here. So I'll just go in as my vendor risk assessor. And so we took a quick look at the vendor portfolio, and we've seen that we can leverage the policy management use case to see if proper controls are in place with the vendor, or the risk management solution where we can start to define any risks that are associated with the vendor. To add to that policy management solution, we can actually link back a question within the questionnaire to a specific policy statement. So here I've got a policy statement to implement 2-factor authentication techniques. What I can actually do is go down here to the assessment metrics and pick any question in any one of my questionnaires and drive a control assessment based off that. So here I've just linked question H6 from the SIG questionnaire. And when this questionnaire gets sent out to a vendor, if they respond yes, what will happen is the control will end up compliant. Otherwise, if they respond no, it will end up non-compliant. So that's a little bit how we can leverage some of the policy management solution today in ServiceNow.
Okay, I think we have one more before we move on, which is talk about notifications. How does the vendor know when there's something for them to check in the portal?
Oh, well, notifications are usually sent out when a task has been assigned to somebody. So if I give a vendor something to do, as long as the vendor has their email address within the platform, it will send them a notification that there's actually something for them to do.
Okay, great. Thanks, Travis.
So I just want to reflect then on what the outcome was. So as Travis mentioned, he didn't really do a lot of configuration for this use case. It's largely out of the box. So what he's able to achieve as far as outcomes. So with the vendor manager in mind, the vendor manager was able to achieve visibility to not only the vendor, the assessment, the state of the assessment through its life cycle, and ultimately resulting in the confidence that they have been properly assessed, thoroughly assessed, and that they can stand behind that vendor relationship after the issues have been remediated. The risk assessor was able to drive efficiencies through a partnership. So we saw how the vendor, when Travis was going back and forth between the back office user experience and the portal user experience, able to drive that efficiency through that partnership. And that was what I was talking earlier about, an outcome of efficiency by sharing the workload across both the organization and the vendor. The other one is from the vendor's perspective. They address the risk and they earn the trust. And this is a full circle. So they move from addressing the risk, which again, the confidence of the vendor manager. So it literally is a full circle. And in the end, the organization has achieved these main outcomes. They've built the trust. They provided the value. They're able to move faster and they're able to grow the business. Everybody wins in this scenario. So I just want to then come back full circle. So at the earlier in the presentation, we talked about this delivering risk intelligence. So what we're able to achieve through this fairly out of the box vendor risk management solution was we're able to take the disconnected data, move it into more of a business context, who the business owner was, give them the reports and the understanding about where they are in their process, and then pass that along to the business leaders who are able to make those business decisions based on that information. So I think, Glenn, were there any other questions?
Yeah, we have had a few coming in here. One question, if an organization doesn't have an existing database supplier contact information, is there a way for the platform to assist in gathering this information? or what approach would you take? Travis or Kirk?
So if the organization does not have a list,
does not have a database of contact
does not have a
information.
database. Yeah. So largely, again, most businesses are operating off of spreadsheets, so that information is easily importable. It also, ServiceNow is great at connecting to other sources of truth. Now, if they don't have other necessarily formal databases, but they do have folders full of maybe vendor profiles that are Excel based, it can chew through Excel pretty quickly or through a loading mechanism. Ultimately, you want to ensure that piece of information typically is done through a procurement function where the vendor managers typically reside.
Okay. Another question, is everything we've seen today out-of-the-box functionality?
Travis, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, there's been no changes to the out-of-the-box functionality, only been a couple users created for the demonstration. So nothing has been modified in order to provide this demo to use today.
Okay. The question about the vendor portal that Kirk talked a bit about, and obviously Travis demoed, wondering about access and security, how the vendor-facing portal integrates with the back office view. Travis, do you want to maybe start on that, and then Kirk, you might have a follow-up.
Okay, the great thing about the vendor portal is it exists out of the box today with no configuration needed. Other than defining your key contacts for the vendor, ServiceNow will automatically give them the roles and access they need in order to access that portal. So a lot of organizations that I've worked with over the past had to go out and set up a specific portal, control all the access associated with the end users, and there was just more work involved to get those vendors in their system so they couldn't see or access the data that they didn't want them to see. The great thing is ServiceNow has already done all that groundwork for you. The vendors can only see the items that they've been assigned. They can't have access to your other data. And if you want to rebrand the portal, it's simple as just going in and rebranding it and providing your own logo and content around the portal itself. Anything to add for yourself, Kirk?
Yeah, actually, I think it's a good question because most security, functions within these organizations that we're dealing with have a major concern about vendors accessing the other portion of the GRC platform directly. So this, I'm going to call it as the separation of function, having a portal interface separate from the back office user experience allows the vendor to interact, but in a secure manner. In our experience with the governments and organizations who have had some very strict security policies, like the separation that the ServiceNow platform provides, it also allows the administration of the user base within the vendor themselves. So you provide that key contact, that information, they can invite other contacts within their domain. So it really does, it provides sort of the best of role-based access control, but that separation that's required by most security organizations.
Okay, thank you. I think we have one last question, which is what makes ServiceNow, the vendor risk solution, what makes it unique compared to some of the other GRC products that are out there? Kirk, I think this is probably a good one for you.
Well, I'm gonna harp on maybe the portal again. The fact that so much of the vendor risk management program is driven by questionnaires or assessments and the relative feedback. So the time savings, the ability to interact, get updates, even delegate to other people, some of that user workflow, that's how people work. The other thing I'd suggest when Travis is going through, some of the back office user experience, the ability to see the other relationships. So as you adopt more and more of the platform itself is very extensive. So the more you do with it, the more you have access to. And we haven't even really touched on some of the process automation that is achieved through orchestration. So a lot of those automated document checks and some of those things, that's where you're starting to get the power. What we showed you today was a sort of a foundation entry into a fairly mature vendor risk management solution that can only be built upon.
Okay. Well, that actually wraps up the Q&A. I did want to say a couple things about Iceberg. Everything we do at Iceberg is about helping organizations deliver value from their risk management programs, and we focus on those outcomes that Kirk talked about earlier. We offer a full life cycle of services from workshops to implementation and post-production services. We also sell the ServiceNow software. And I wanted to highlight one of the workshops we do. It's a full process engineering workshop. We look at how you're managing your vendor risk processes now and identify candidates for automation and integration into a software solution like ServiceNow. Kirk and I will both be in Las Vegas next week for Knowledge 18, so let us know if you'd like to meet up while we're there. You can look for us in our blue GRC polo shirts on the floor. And I want to say thank you to Kirk and Travis and to everyone who took the time to tune in today to listen to the discussion. You can get in touch with us if you'd like to do a deeper dive on the conversation or demo, and we will email you the link later this afternoon so you can access the deck and the video. If you found value from today's presentation, please share it with your colleagues inside or outside of your organization who may be going through the same journey, the same challenges that you are. Once again, thanks Travis and Kirk, and thank you for tuning in and joining us. Have a great afternoon.